So, okay.
Go on, James. It's up to you, man, to open the works here.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't, well, I guess I'll just say like a couple things to name the sort of aspects of the container, but yeah, I mean, I really hope that we can take some time on this call to like get a group sense of like of what this process would look like to do a sort of a reading circle um, that isn't necessarily a like a book club style where it's week by week, but is sort of a lot of folks like digging into a body of work and collectively and notating them together, and then having check-ins about where everybody's coming from and seeing, sort of on a more networked basis, seeing where we're landing and what little synchronicities we're finding. Um, the to the extent that uh, I should say that that this is parallel to and somewhat in relationship to a project or like an archive, like a loose alliance that I'm sort of setting up called Open, that me and Spencer have been working on, called Open Mutualism. Open Mutualism is meant to be like a descriptor for like a feedback loop or reciprocal thing between exchange between more basic, like more immediatist and traditional, say, just humanist mutualism. So like worker cooperative, guild organizing, and then the more cool, like exotic peer-to-peer platform cooperative, open value network type stuff, but between humans. And then weird mutualism is sort of an umbrella for all the types of speculative democratic or economic relationships that might unfold between, uh, on an interspecies basis, but also in the direction of subhuman or post-human or cyborg type categories, or even artistic categories, or other sort of like they call it, Carlos Castaneda called it inorganic life forms, stuff like that. Uh, and so yeah, like what can be done from the reciprocity there. It's meant to be a descriptive archive that is sort of just collating stuff that's already out there or work that people are already doing, without any editorial input on that. But the important thing for this group is that archive is meant to be interoperable with what Open Civics is developing, which is uh, a broad Arweave based, like censorship resistant, knowledge commons that would just be a huge backend of markdown files. And so, the hope is that what comes out of this group, to the to the extent that there's significant notation, and maybe development of that notation into some sort of body of work or research output. The hope is that everyone's comfortable with that entering the knowledge commons as a sort of open copyright, open source object that can be composable with these different lenses that Open Civics is sort of initiating on that commons, and hopefully with the end of production of sort of action oriented stuff, because I think there's a lot of academic work on this, a million extremely creative papers, but fuck that shit. Like, like, I just think that the way that those discourses can propel themselves and become circular, is really like pointing in the direction and the need for stuff that's a little bit more consequential, and that is yeah, outside of the boundaries of those institutions, where it's like, yeah, people have real problems. People in cities and rural spaces, bioregions, whatever, have real problems, and those bounded zones where these really esoteric academic conversations are happening are just unable to break through and be meaningful on that practical level. Um, and yeah, I should say a word about, or just briefly, like I don't intend to um, just my bias coming in is mutualistic, as I said in the chat, or like is from a mutualist perspective, which to me means sort of uh, uh, solidarity, economic reciprocity that doesn't um, economic reciprocity or like other types of you know reciprocal communication alliances. But the point being that the key being that like doesn't depend on broader institutional structures, um, autonomous in that sense. Like if anybody's familiar with the like Italian tradition or like autonomous social centers, they call them in Europe. To that extent, like separate from the state, which is obviously what Web3, the legitimacy and um, the hardness of Web3 has a lot to offer there. Um, to that extent, my own bias going into the different modes of these of interspecies relationships is interested more in um, the artistic uh, and then direct direct. You would almost call it speculative because I think that that a lot of this theorizing has been on the representational and rights-based plane. And I think that the artistic plane that Sympoiesis is definitely looking at is pointing more in the direction of immediate relationships. And but it's also just really hard to think about because animals don't, animals and plants obviously don't have, in most cases, don't have the capacity for symbolic thought. But then again, I do think that most of the institutional regimes that we interact with are primarily communicate violence, and I think violence is actually non-symbolic, and so the extent to which a lot of the rational or what we consider the rational or abstract infrastructure that we depend on is actually more so based in non-symbolic communication, and I think that points the way to the opportunity uh, for other ways of organizing structures like that. Yeah. Okay. So that's really what I wanted to cover. Interest in reflecting whatever we do here in this open copyright archive. B, my own mutualistic bias that doesn't necessarily have to transfer into the direction of the group at large. And then yeah, beyond that, interested in folks' opinions or thoughts on the canon that we have right now, how it might be best to reduce it, or if it needs to be reduced or purified down a little bit. If there's any themes that are coming out of the canon that folks have seen that would they like to suggest, and then just this notating structure and what people are thinking about that.
Well, maybe the first thing that yeah, thank you for that rundown. There's so much depth there and so many directions we could go here. At least when it comes to the canon and the reading list, I said I was like casting this broad net, just dropping a whole bunch of things in that I've read over the years that might or might not be part of this. I wonder if we begin by developing a framework by what we even mean by interspecies mutualism that allows us to help assess kind of where these different bodies of thought fall within our interest. I don't know if that's like sort of like these concentric circles or if there's like some sort of hierarchy, like a stack that we're looking at, or kind of what direction we go with it. But it does seem like it would be helpful when sort of considering all of this, like what are some of the lenses that we're looking at it through? I think since this is an emerging field, it can mean different things to different people. So yeah, if we can, and that framework could begin in a very simple way. of looking at a few different facets of what we mean. But yeah, I'm just wondering how we can sort of like um, organize everything we have here, and that can then help us clarify and prioritize.
Yeah, if I can share a little bit of the type of experience, Will, that we have been having in Sympoiesis all over the years, is we work by cycles. And in the cycles, we expand and we contract like respiration, respiratory dynamics. So when we expand, we're kind of doing what physics called entropy. But in physics, entropy means loss of heat, right, and loss of life. But in our cases, we generate more heat because we want to interact, right? We want to interact. We want to pair. We want to know what's out there, and that we can make a conversation about it, read about it, explore about it, and then contract and see what really comes out of it. So I totally agree with your perspective, Will, and I'm just adding a little bit of the experience that we have been having through the years via Sympoiesis. And if Ingvild wants to aggregate something more in this sense, feel free, my dear.
You mean about how we've been going about handling or sharing data together in Sympoiesis, or sharing thoughts?
Yeah, because even that, you guys will notice that is different. The way that I perceive it is different from the way that Ingvild perceives it, because she's coming from a different place, a different exploration. I'm coming from a totally different one. So we really don't have the homostasis of the Sympoiesis exploration at large. It comes from diversity, a diversified field of people coming from all sorts of grounds and perspectives and visions. And so we don't really have that typical consensus dynamics, to generate a more homogeneous dynamics where everybody's heading to one place. No, we're heading to all sorts of places, and with this expansion and contraction dynamics. So it would be interesting to see through the cycles, right? To see how Ingvild has been perceiving that through the years.
I don't know what to say. But trying to relate it to the form we're trying to shape here, I would say that I would welcome a bit more structure, or maybe a bit more like shared starting point, like what you said, Will, about maybe trying to share some thoughts about what interspecies mutualism means and what can be included, which is, I think, a vast field. So I don't think it will be a hindrance, but just helpful to start drinking from the same well, so to speak, and then go from there. But as far as my experience with Sympoiesis goes, it's been amazing, because it's as you said, Vinicius, that people are coming from such different places, viewpoints, geographically, vocationally, philosophically. So if we can, which I think we will, carry on with that spirit here as well, and then I think we'll have the best of both worlds. So yes, I would welcome some more structure, and two, let's diversity breeds strength.
That's Chris. That's another Sympoiesis. We discover that there's another Sympoiesis out there. It's not the same one. But right. Thanks for sharing.
Right. What is okay?
So, guys, I would love to hear too, coming from Sympoiesis too, Tim's perspective, because he's more recent. Tim is more recent in the Sympoiesis co-creation, exploration, and co-creative dynamics, right? So, Tim, my friend, feel free.
Well, yeah, I mean, I also think Will's suggestion is a good one to kind of have some take a shot at cohesion and keep the breathing and the respiration, as you spoke of, to allow the freedom for people to kind of interject with some divergent directions and things, and be open to all kinds of different people that want to participate. So yeah, I think that's a nice combination. Yeah, Sympoiesis, like I mentioned earlier, for me, is speaks to this kind of processual kind of co-emergence sort of a thing in life processes. So and symbiosis was sort of some of the topics we talked about early on. I think of commensalism, I guess is the word. I don't know how to say the word properly, but um, and again, the experiment that was very exciting and that we've found interesting in recent times around giving voice to natural entities was through the LLMs was exciting and technical and all that, but it's really just we know that it's the most surface of kind of dipping the toe in the water of these ideas and making a concrete, constructing something, in the world other than, the ideas and the words we exchange and with the ideas we have in our minds. So it was exciting for all of those reasons, in that it had connection to the ideas we talk about and was a real thing in the world, so to speak. But again, I think it's, for me, just the very, 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 very beginning of the possibilities. And I'll just say one other thing I'm just going to mention, just to appreciate, I guess, James really is I mentioned processual. I mean, I've been big into process philosophies for a long time, so that's another connection that I can't sort of elide in the description. Because when I say the things I just said, in my mind, there's all these threads, weaving and interacting and uh, ontologically and epistemologically interpenetrating each other's sort of interact tomes, if you want to call it that. And therefore sort of externalized connectomes of sort of a socio-technical extended externalized extended quote unquote thought process, or what have you, cognition, if you want. So yeah, I just so for me, the sympoiesis is a little bit of a opening up to some of those kinds of imagining those sorts of possibilities, and maybe a little less blocky kind of a universe, and one that's a little more flowy, a little more emergent, and a little more divergent and diverse and imaginative than we usually engage with. So I was really excited to meet someone else who likes process philosophy, and I know some of the other folks here probably do as well, as Vinicius, I think, as well. So I don't know where all that went, but I was a bit of respiring and a little bit of converging, maybe. Well, I don't know. So.
Yeah, I think it's necessary to just share a little bit more with folks. In this sense, what Tim just said about being more flowy, less blocky, is because we have a very different perspective coming from this complex systems view of the world. Like it seems like everything is about creating systems, right? And systems is about planning, control, and something like that. And we look at the first order cybernetics coming from Norbert Wiener, for instance. It's about control, right? It's about, if you look at society at broad, it's about economic and social engineering that governments and corporations has been doing through the internet itself, or Web 2, right? Most particularly. But what I'm saying is that we come more from a emergent, interactive, mutualistic, James, way of doing things, and it's more related to channels, closed channel, second order cybernetics, that is about you being the change when the change is happening than anything else. So I just want to add that understanding for you guys to better start to have a better grip about the things that we have been doing as Sympoiesis through the years, right? And it wasn't even called Sympoiesis like 2 years ago. It was another thing. It was another name. So it's very very organic, very interactive in that sense. So yeah, I'll stop here. Would be nice to hear Chris. Chris has to go. So Chris, feel free, man.
Cool, thanks. I like discussion as much as I like reading, and I've been to some reading groups before that have had various facilitation formats on the discussion component of corpus or a selection of texts. So I'm curious about the interplay between our asynchronous individual reading, or perhaps even our synchronous collective reading, and when we come together again to discuss what we've actually read, and how we sync up to do that in little groups or big groups. Yeah, that would be what I would add to what I would like to participate in this process. Yeah.
I would love to get to that question, and since I'm also hopping off at the top of the hour, I want to get one other thing in here, which is that Regen Foundation works pretty closely with Earth Law Center, and one of the big things that Earth Law Center has been looking at is how do non-human entities show up in legal contracts and take agency for themselves. And there's a wide range of ways that can happen. There can be, like for example, with rivers, there are river keepers who speak on behalf of the river. Then there's the question of, well, how are they sourcing the will of the river? And there's a whole range of indigenous approaches there. In some cases, these river keepers are from Native American tribes or indigenous groups in other parts of the world. In some cases, you might use a much more high-tech approach of looking at a whole range of different indicators and things like that, or even species within the rivers, like what's happening with the salmon runs or other things like that. So just to put out there, there is like a very sort of concrete application of this interspecies communication world in how it shows up in legal frameworks. And the Earth Law Center is actually publishing a second edition of their textbook. And I've been working closely with Tony Zell, who's heading up that process. So even if there's original research we're doing in this process that we would like to be showing up in law school curriculum when it comes to Earth law, that's something that's open to this group here. Just to put that into the field, and then I'd love to come back to Chris's question about practicalities and how we're the logistics of how we're running this group here.
So completely not from a place of rich experience or having done a lot of these, just intuitively what came to mind was basically a meeting every 2 weeks. I see though that, or I'm anticipating that I mean, the chat is quite big. It's unclear how many of those folks are interested in contributing on a sort of intimate basis, but I do imagine that different circles or different parallel interests will come out of that. Like the idea of a non-synchronous, sort of nonlinear, choose your own adventure through the canon method obviously implies that there will be intersections and that there will be people that find that they're reading the same texts with the same lens at the same time. So I guess what I would propose is, these twice monthly meetings with, rich opportunities for folks to have smaller side meetings throughout. And beyond that, I mean, and I'm open or interested in any thoughts on how to facilitate, on how strategies of facilitating those actual meetings that anyone might have. And then just the other side of it is this document, which the work to be done is to again hone the canon or make a decision on the canon, which maybe that, since this call is fairly short, can be done async. But I'm curious if anyone thinks that, or if folks think that it will be a strong enough attractor to maintain momentum to have this Google Doc, which is just making space for notes, or if actually another interface might be. I mean, you know, that's a very basic interface that a lot of people like. It's fairly easy for people to compose with, or to you know, people are familiar with Google Docs, but I guess just like on the level of just that interface, or like that particular medium, or other elements of the way that this is organized, that like whether folks with more experience think that that will be enough of an attractor, or if there's other elements that can be brought in to keep the momentum going, and keep things you know, keep everybody's movement through this canon synced up enough to be like novelty generating and productive.
Yeah, in Cipoesis we have the habit to map all things that we have been doing through KU and Kumu, as you saw in the Cipoesis, landing page, James. So it would be nice to add that too, right? Not only, we already have an AI companion here that's going to transcribe our call here. We're going to be pretty much well served with the transcription here from the AI, and the mapping that we can do in Kumu, right? Because it's more, interdimensional, and we can see how things related, if someone sides apart and do some more profound deep dive exploration and something else, we can map that too and see how it relates to the bigger thing that we're doing. So yeah, that's my suggestion. This is something that we have been doing in Cipoesis for ages, so I'm just adding that.
I guess I have concerns about Google being like the main spot where we're annotating and other things like that. I was just dropping in the chat here that I've seen book clubs that have either used Rome or used Obsidian, and both of those, the way that they have the ability for internal links, I feel like, we could have like our master reading list, and then we could have internal links for each of the texts, and then we could have the text, and then we could have all the annotations, and but then that I think in both cases, at least the host, I think, has to have like a paid account or something like that. So I'd be interested in considering some more like sort of database approaches. But yeah, I'm also any of it. Yeah.
Obsidian is my primary work tool, and to the extent that yeah, I mean, if it sort of depends on how technically, like, on how comfortable folks are, but like, it's a little bit of a leap. I haven't had to pay anything for Obsidian. I'm not sure if, I think it may be a free tool.
I think if you're using their hosting for shared collaborative notes, I think you can, I mean, since it's open source, you can self-host or other things like that. But we could even just do a poll in the Telegram. What would what would you prefer as the primary repository for this book group?
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing about Obsidian is that, like, I'm publishing straight to Quartz, through Markdown, and going straight to Arweave, basically. The Obsidian Quartz to Arweave, and that is how I intend any of the output from this group to be filtered out. So if folks feel like, sort of internet native enough to all be coordinating at that ground, I'd be super pumped about that. But my assumption was that it might be a little bit of a barrier. But yeah, I mean, I think for folks that are interested, we can see like where they're at with that, because that would be ideal, I think, actually. But
could you post a poll, and is there any other platforms you want to get on the list to consider?
Interested in Rome.
There's the browser extension Memex, which has shared annotation if you're in the same space of web documents and PDF documents. I don't know if that would cover enough of the formats if we're dealing with offline texts as well. I thought to answer your question, James, about would it be novel enough a sharing platform to sustain momentum? I thought that was interesting, actually, in the context of an Obsidian knowledge base. I feel like maybe your hunch is right that it might be a little bit more of the of a core group maintaining that, especially I don't know what your take on authorship is, but I'm curious how what's going to keep everybody pooling into the same thing. Just how to keep that kind of domain of interest. But I think a poll in the chat is a great shout. There's a big difference between how we're coordinating and collecting stuff and talking about it and sharing it, and versus like how we're publishing it, right? It could be the same, but it doesn't necessarily need to be.
Yeah, I sense this is this will be a further conversation because it's somewhat of it's a key problem for this. But just to touch it. Oh, is it already the hour? Well,
yeah, super sorry I have to hop off,
yeah,
but no. We'll keep coming.
Yeah, just to last thing, like I'm interested in just on an async basis, if folks want to throw in what they think to the chat, what they think about their impulses on limiting the canon or keeping it very expansive, or what that might mean to think about that canon, the reading list.
Okay. Yeah, wonderful to meet you all here. I'm going to hop off now too.
Thanks for showing up, guys. Cheers.
Thanks, James. Yeah. If anyone's hanging around for a second.
All right. Last minutes. Go on to.
No, I was just going to say I've been putting a plug in for is it Rosie Bradiotti? You might have heard of her, or Bradiotti. Yeah, I wanted to see something. We'd love to sort of, and also the other thought was, I wonder if there's the odd, maybe it's a long form paper or something, but something smaller than a book, but maybe that we can utilize texts that aren't. I didn't see all the different ones that were in there yet, but I don't know to what degree they were different, publication formats, or whether they were all. Texts like the Karen Barad book that was referenced. But maybe not again, like the paper can be the thing too. But I will also just say last thing is I like your idea of going through it in our own path. I love this idea of the paths intersecting and people meandering in their own way. And then seeing what comes out of that, seeing how that's, what happens. I think that's a neat idea. So I see that as a positive experiment, so to speak, or a feature, not a bug. Even though I can imagine maybe sometimes people might feel that the loss of synchronicity in the reading is somehow an issue. I think it's a possible opportunity. So yeah. So thanks.
Yeah, hopefully it's trading.
I would love to expand on that a little bit, if I may, James. Saying that one of the things that fascinates me when it comes to mutualism or symbiotic dynamics is the capability to pick up something very focused, driven, very reductionist, and open the code, open the cultural code and see how that relates to everything else. Map it out, how it relates to the experiences that InkBuild is doing, to the things that you have, everybody that is involved with, how you can ground it, how you ground it, and the empirical experimentations that have been happening, and how that relates to the other works or the other papers or something like that. That would be really nice, and another thing that I feel that is very interesting is we can register this on chain. Like we can do a storytelling about our explorations on Mirror XYZ or something like that, and have that already related to Web3 Refi, for instance, you know? And yeah, I'm just expanding a little bit, just sharing how I can feel that makes this thing really interesting. Not, you know, having it as a starting point, you know, the reading, the synchronicity or asynchronicity of the text of the canon that's being shared, but would be really nice. I'm just expanding what just Tim said in my perspective, right? So that's it. So forgive me, James. I just kind of cut you out when I said, and I was sharing my view here.
Could you say a little bit more about the first part, about like relating? Do you mean relating the as we're moving through the texts, related like in other words, gaining enough familiarity with everybody else in the group that when I'm looking at a given text, I'm able to say, oh, this would be interesting to something Vinny is doing, or oh, this is maybe tagging them in that way or something. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yes, establishing a semantic, establishing what we did in the first the Web 1 version, was different from the Web 2 version. Its semantic is very client server and cloud based, and it was a more peer to peer. And the work, you know, the packages that we were semantically sculpting, let's put it this way, you know, creating to navigate through the Web 1 version of the internet was creating semantics between the packages, creating semantics between the thematics, and was and still is a very interesting exploration, right? And what I just shared in the chat, the Scuttlebutt, it works like that. It's a very peer-to-peer dynamics that creates different types of semantics for different types of packages or explorations that you want to do, right? And but we don't need to go deep dive on it. Like I'm just giving an example. I just said that we can still stay on the surface doing a Kumu thing, like mapping out via Kumu all the interrelationships between that text has with the exploration that I've been doing. Can, you know, amplify it in a way that I'm not seeing, I'm viewing it. And yeah, that would be a type of metadata, right? And it would be interesting to see that thing coming alive as an organism, you know, a mutualistic organism. Kind of a way to generate the first blueprints for the open mutualism as a protocol, right? So this is just my thoughts here.
Like I'm seeing sort of blurry outlines of it in my mind, but maybe there's maybe we can get into it on a little more technical basis at some point very soon. I have pretty good availability, so maybe I'd be down for maybe a second meet to talk in detail about that. Ingvild, I wonder, as a philosopher, and like I kind of wonder what you're thinking about all this. Maybe especially, well, just in general, but maybe especially the canon and the direction and impulses on whether to restrain or like keep it super blown out or blown up, or restrain it a little bit more to keep things more coherent. Yeah.
Ingrid, we're not hearing you.
Now?
Now, yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay. Right. So thank you, James, for asking. I think the canon could be quite wide, also including things that are not written form, but films or art projects or documentaries, any kind of materiality that we can access and share together. But then maybe it would be helpful to have some kind of tag system so that it's easier to filter through. And another way to also strike a balance between the exploring versus coming together could be that we all read different things as we feel like it, but there could be one question or a theme for each session, and then we just bring together all our disparate impressions, both from what we read or other animals we've encountered or whatever has happened, and then we will explore, but based on maybe one starting point for each session. That's my thinking.
Done. Yeah, that sounds amazing. Yeah. Like an open question for each. Yeah, there was just it just needed that a little bit more of that binding agent, and that just like does the trick.
Oh, and as for the Kumu map structure versus something with Obsidian, for example, I think maybe both would be great, because people also have different ways of reading data, and it could be nice if it's possible to easily copy any information into both formats. Maybe that would be best, but I don't know if that's going to be too demanding to sort of have two systems running though. But yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I want to in terms of like publishing stuff, I don't want to like impose. I want to throw it into the chat at least. I don't want to impose or like be too, I don't know. I constructed this open mutualism output page, which is just, it's really basic. Yeah, like a really basic flow that just goes straight from Obsidian to Quartz, and other people can feed into it pretty easily, as long as if you're comfortable with GitHub Desktop, then you can directly publish. Then anyone can directly publish. I like this or another or an independent front page, but if we're publishing both notes and potentially like other kinds of content that gets produced in this flow that feeds into Arweave, then that opens us up to a relationship with Open Civics that may lead to that could lead to funding opportunities, and just sort of legibility before a lot of potential funding bodies. It's sort of the it's sort of like a trade that or a notion of a gesture of reciprocity with Open Civics is sort of the contribution to this open copyright library, and then there's sort of that code's inclusion in that network. So something to think about there. So okay. So it sounds like Inga, like your impulse is to add a little bit more of a binding agent or constraint on the reading on the meeting and the meeting and schedule flow, but by tightening up on that end, we can loosen up on the end of the breadth of the canon, so long as that canon is filtered with tags that can make it legible and easier to swim through. Something like that.
Yeah, I think you encapsulated it well. I saw Tim raise his hand just a little bit ago. Did you want to shoot in something?
Only two things. One is in terms of extending the modes, or the media types. I like that idea. And it's I can see how maybe it makes it more difficult to sort of track on, but I think it's great to open up the format of the content, as Ingvild suggested, to films or art or things like this. And I connect that with the artistic mode that you list in your rights-based, representation-based, artistic base, right? So we can incorporate that sort of a thread of that study or way of engaging into this, perhaps without getting too lost in you know, or what's diffuse or you know, disintegrating to such that there isn't a thing anymore. So I like the idea of opening up to the art modalities, and it put me in mind of just maybe at some point there's some experiments that we can even do within this group, like the speculative fiction thing that we did in the other one, right? But maybe it's not as quite expansive because that's a lot of energy, but maybe it's uh, uh, creating visual art together or something, or maybe a couple people. And so the intersection of art production or artistic production or research creation or whatever the right word would be, I think is an interesting extension to the consumption. So prosumer, you know, the production of these things as well in the course of these dialogues and things, you know, in a reasonably tractable, feasible kind of a way. And then when I thought about that, and then you imagine, you know, okay, well, you know, you also, I just wondered if maybe in that production mode, there could be the conceit, so to speak, or the enabling constraint, if you like to put it this way, where if there's a contribution of an artistic production into this interspecies mutualism context, that we challenge ourselves to uh, approach that in such a way that it is a co-creation. For instance, I could contribute a picture, but it would only really be in the mode I'm discussing as if I met with Vinicius and we drew the picture together and we talked about it. We created something together. Um, or if it was, you know, a sound thing, it would maybe James, we would make a piece of music or something or whatever. Do you know what I mean? But it seems to me an interesting notion at some point if the production of creative artifacts was a part of this and that such production was agreed to be one that was co-creative amongst the participants as opposed to sort of me bringing something I made, which would be perhaps interesting. I'd love to see all kinds of things people make, but that could be a lot too. And anyway.
Very fruitful meeting. I'm trying to take some notes, but I'm realizing that actually the AI bot probably has been taking some notes, and we'll have a summary. Nice. How about that? Our greater than human friends helping us out. Cool. Yeah, I mean the main things that so extending the contents of the library to include, well, there was mention of not just books but papers, which there is a good diversity of those, but then also to include different types of medium and different sort of genres, and then the questions. Oh, did we have any? Well, maybe that can be left. Unless anybody has like a bursting idea for when we do have the you know, imagining that there are, you know, maybe there is a side group that is talking about a particular strand here and there, but that these reliable twice monthly meetings. Is there anything about the structure of those meetings that is leaping out for anybody?
Well, only if someone had produced something and felt they wanted to sort of have room or sort of, you know, reserve a part of the meeting to talk about something. Like, I mean, I can see how we would want to have it fairly open, uh, starting off and free form discussion and not lose that. But there can be times, I'm sure, when people are eager to discuss a particular thing. So I don't know to what degree that we could allow for that sort of thing. To sort of reserve, like for the last half, I'd like, you know, the last half will be Ingvild talking about such and such.
That's a great idea, Tim. And I was, yeah, I had that thought, but I didn't know how to put it into words. And yeah, that would be great. Like personally, I would love uh, you like the opinion of the group about what Danilo and I are going to do, for example, because I feel that there could be so much collective wisdom so that we can make the most out of the avatar, for example. So but I don't know. I mean, yeah, that's just a wish. That doesn't have to happen. Just being part of this is already so inspiring, but just putting it out there.
Yeah, I want to sing like or call out that two sort of impulses or yeah, like two directions that are I'm feeling tension within myself, which is that on the one hand, you know, I mean, I've done some community, you know, like I've organized some both in person and online sort of group building like this, but some networks, but like uh, I still feel pretty new at it, and what am I saying? Like, it, the one mode would feel to me to be like as to be very restrained and and keep things like knowing that people have a lot going on and and just sort of keeping a very like narrow having participation in the group be a very narrow ask and even showing restraint about like constructing much more elaborate asks, even if people are into it at the beginning, because potentially they could burn out. And so just like holding expectation for on a more restrained basis. But on the other hand, I think that like if there's so much bursting energy like towards this, then the completely alternative approach to sort of like immediately jump into like just building out a community or you know uh, full of art producing and side groups and all this sort of thing. These two tendencies are kind of I'm not really sure what to make of
And
them.
that's why I shared that. As I said, Sympoiesis is the latest name that we give for this years-long exploration, right? And in that sense, what we boil down to this type of dynamics: you expand, you contract, you expand in different types of cycles, and that enables the possibility to everybody chime in its own time, more synchronously or more asynchronously in different cycles, and it makes it open for people to chime in. New people come in to chime in, so it's not a group dynamics; it's a cluster dynamics. It's an interactive cluster dynamics. It's very different. We don't identify Sympoiesis as a group. It's more like a cluster. A very interactive cluster of people that expands and contracts because it has a main theme of exploration that is more than human life, but it relates to everything outside of this bubble, let's put it this way. So yeah, that's why I propose that, because so we don't have to worry with what you just said, because people understand that it's something that it's going to be part of his life until it's not, right? So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's my 2 cents to what you just said. So guys, let's wrap this thing now. Final thoughts, James?
Yeah, not yeah, super excited. Yeah, nothing comes to mind except curiosity about yeah. Well, I guess so. I guess just next steps. This poll that they were encouraging, and then the outlines. I think we can take. I would say like let's get more consensus on some of the stuff that's been suggested here. But I think with this kind of thing, it makes sense to just say screw it and just kind of move. Tim, were you thumbs upping more consensus or just running?
Well, actually both, because you said I wanted to change to a happy face when you said the second part too. So, but I meant around consensus around some of the logistics, some of the things which are not contentious. That there shall be some sort of way of capturing artifacts or discussions like those logistics, and I think that's a good thing to get the consensus on. And then on that front, it did occur to me that maybe we don't all need to be editors of it. Maybe there can be some people, and maybe the baton could be passed between people now and then if it's too much for someone, but maybe the case that people are able to produce something and contribute it in, and then someone who is familiar with the tooling is able to, on their behalf, capture that. So.
Oh shit. Sorry, my neighbor is just being taken out on a stretcher. Interesting. Sorry about that. Yeah. Tim, sorry, I missed
Yeah, no sweat. I'm just saying, yeah, consensus on some of those sort of logistics, kind of pedestrian sorts of things, which are nevertheless important to have some understanding of. And then also I was suggesting that some mutualism around the actual care and feeding of such documents, that not everyone needs to be an editor in the tool. It could be the case that some people can contribute their content to that person and have it included, and that role can move around as well. Just sort of balancing out the complexity of getting everyone on the same tool, that as well. But yeah, coordination, but also cooperation and collaboration.
Yeah, it does strike me that that some maintenance of the publication process, as even if it's just notes that are being brought in, whatever. Because it may be the case that some people are very comfortable publishing straight through Obsidian out to courts, to the open web, whereas others may want to use a more simple interface, and then that can be translated to Markdown. Some roles for maybe a couple roles for some stewards would be sweet. Yeah, we can think about that. Maybe even some minimally funded roles, because I think there is some. Yeah, I think there's some money floating around in just different groups that I'm aware of that sort of have like treasuries that are burning a hole in their pocket and would like to toss a little bit of funds out to the right cause. Yeah, yeah, and I'm really excited to see where this goes. And yeah, I also want to acknowledge that you guys have been doing this work, and that this is sort of to some extent just like bringing in another wing of the community, and tying that together, and that like where that goes and what that networks into is like open-ended, right? So
yeah, there's kind of an element, I guess, maybe a meta theme, certainly keeps coming to mind, and I heard it in what you just said as well a little bit, is the notion of there being certain levers of change in complex systems, or timing of change, the right time for change, when there's a window of opportunity to make a change. Different systems thinkers and such to theorize about these kinds of things. One of the other terms that gets used is sort of unfreezing and freezing. So at certain times there's that fluidity or liminality of a situation or interactions where the allowance to discover a new way is open or more open. So as things are sort of unfrozen, and then maybe you're able to successfully introduce some new capacity or into the repertoire of the system by virtue of a change that you make when it's sufficiently unfrozen. All that said, the meta thing, the sort of meta observation that seems to supervene some of these talking is that we are in a very unfrozen time. We are in a very fluid, very things are not frozen. We are not it's not 1950s. We do not all have the same refrigerator. We, very, very different time. So if that was frozen, this is definitely unfrozen kind of a time. And so that
Yeah,
means, I was just going to say, according to the systems thinker, it means maybe it's an opportunity. That's what I'm getting at as well. So,
including the polo caps too. They're becoming more unfrozen.
oh, well, yeah, that too. But you know what I meant, in terms of possibilities and in terms of open-endedness, as much from uncertainty and confusion, right? To cause the unfreezing, the anyway, I'll stop there. But it seemed to me that that was a metaphor for some of what's being discussed, is the degree to which there is a removal of constraints in the thinking or the ideas or the way of organizing versus how tight it is as well. And on many, many levels across many, many different subjects, that maybe that's kind of part of what we're struggling with and trying to balance at times.
Yeah, I want to just without, well, I'll just say I think that there's I think that what happened with Trump, which has been very disturbing, and in our part of the world, is sort of defining the time. Has to do with people have pointed out that Trump is kind of like a little bit of a magician, who in that sense of both a showman person, but also in the more mystical sense of someone who understands the nature of attention and the nature of the ability to self-actualize realities. And I think that it feels, in a weird way, it feels really appropriate to respond to or during this time, to be diverting attention to something that's so far away, or that feels maybe to some people that think they're more immediatist concerns, that feels as far away as this interspecies question, to the extent that I think that it's the nature with animals that their interiority can remain hidden and be totally unavailable based on your attention, based on if you want to see the world that way, if you want to see the world the world is just an object to have gold toilets or whatever then that the world will be available to you in that way. But if you if you want to transition your attention, then that means that the interiority of things opens up in a different way. And so just the idea of we're kind of talking about unfreezing, flowing, stretching, something like this, and it just seems like an appropriate response to the closure of the moment to open up.
Yeah, Ingrid has to go and I have to go too, James. So we can wrap up here. Was a beautiful second call, right? So we're just getting started. It was a pleasure to be with you and all the guys that you invited, right? So guys, bye-bye.
Vinicius. Bye, Tim. Bye, James. To be
Cheers,
continued.
Sure. Thank you.
Be well.